All right, our recording is started. Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you could join us today for Terry's Let's Talk About Law School. My name is Amber Masso, and I'm the Director of Communications and Alumni Engagement for the Terry Foundation. I'm pleased to be joined by our panel today, and I'm going to go ahead and let the panel introduce themselves. Just some quick notes and reminders. Today's session, as I mentioned, is being recorded. At any time during the panel, please feel free to put questions and comments in the chat. Of course, we'd love to hear what everyone's studying, what everyone's focus area is. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat while our panel is introducing themselves. I'll be moderating questions throughout the panel and we'll share them. I will also be saving some questions until the end, so we can make sure that we keep things moving along. But with that panel, I'll let you go ahead and start introducing yourselves. One more time, I recommend viewing this in gallery view. That's in the top right-hand corner of your screen is how you can change that. If you're on mobile, I believe you swipe right to change the view. And we'll go ahead and let our panel get started with intros.
Okay, you wanted me to go first?
Yes, sir.
I'm Rhett Campbell. I'm the chairman of the board and chief executive officer of the Terry Foundation. I'm also a graduate of SMU Law School back in '73. I practiced law for 40 years before I quit and came full-time with the foundation. I was a JAG in the Air Force for 4 years. I was the managing partner of a small law firm in Houston for 25 years. And then I was in a large law firm for about 12 years before I finally quit and came to the foundation.
I'm Brian Carroll. I'm a member of the board of directors for the foundation. I'm a 1994 engineering graduate from the University of Texas. I've worked for a while. I went to Baylor for law school, and I am now the managing partner of Stanford Carroll. That's a construction and federal procurement boutique firm, and I'm also an adjunct professor of law at Baylor University.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel McDaniel, and I went to University of Texas, graduated in 2011, was awarded the Terry Scholarship in 2007. After graduating from University of Texas, I went to Stanford Law School. I went straight through, graduated in 2014, and I've been practicing ever since, so it's been a solid 6 years. The first 4 years, I was working at a law firm called O'Melveny and Myers, doing commercial litigation and white collar investigations, government investigations. And then the last 2 years, I've been at the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. I'm currently in the Domestic Violence Unit.
My name's Sara Wolfe. I'm a 2012 Texas Tech Terry Scholar. I majored in public relations, and then I also went straight through to the University of Houston Law Center, graduated in 2015, and I'm located here in Houston. I started off at a mid-sized firm here, just doing kind of general litigation. And recently this summer, I lateraled to a large law firm called Caswoods Benson Torres, based out of New York, still in our Houston office though, and I'm a complex commercial litigation associate.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining the event today. My name is Cody West. I am a 2015 Terry Scholar. I went to Texas State, and then right after I graduated from Texas State, I went to the University of Houston Law Center. And as of right now, I'm currently a fellow in the U.S. Congress. Oh, and I focus on tax and energy and trade policy.
Okay, hi guys, my name is Danielle Snow. I'm a 2013 A&M Terry. I graduated in 2017 with a communications and business major. Took a little bit of time to travel, lived in Panama for a while before I came to Baylor Law School, where I am currently a 3L and will most likely go into construction and business litigation.
All right, panel, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to have all of your diverse backgrounds and experiences represented for our attendees. So why don't we jump right into our discussion? The first topic that I'd like for us to cover is, let's talk about what is the practice of law and what can you do with a law degree?
I guess I'll jump kind of first into that question from my group. So what is the practice law? Well, what's the practice of law not? It's nothing like you see on TV. I encourage anyone who is thinking about the practice of law, go and find a law firm you could either spend some time in, you can intern in, find lawyers like this panel here and talk to them about what do they really do every day. It's a very fast-paced job. It's a very time-intensive job that you can do, but it's also one of the most fascinating jobs I've ever been involved with. In my practice, I have people that I deal with. They're litigators. They are problem solvers. I deal with general counsels for a lot of in-house counsel for a lot of the bigger clients we deal with. And so the practice of law is very wide-ranging. The other thing I can tell you from watching students when in my role as a law professor get jobs, a law degree is a springboard. You don't have to go be a commercial litigator like some of us are on this call with a law degree. A lot of what a law degree provides is similar to what's in an MBA. I've had firms hire people and treat a law degree as equivalent to an MBA. I also taught at the University of Texas for a period of time, and they treated my law degree as a terminal degree, like a PhD, to allow me to teach at UT in the engineering school. So it can let you do a lot of things, and I'll turn it over to some of my other panel members to follow up.
Yeah, so regarding the practice of law and what it's like, I feel like there are, at a high level, there's a handful of skills that are used when you're actually practicing law. And as Brian said, just because you have a JD doesn't mean you have to practice law. But if you're actually practicing law at a high level, the main things you do, I would say, are fact gathering, legal research, legal writing, oral advocacy, negotiations, and statutory interpretation. I think those are the main ones. And depending on what type of practice you do, certain of those areas are going to be the bulk of your practice. So for instance, I started off doing mostly civil litigation, and now I'm fully in the criminal law realm. When I was doing civil litigation, I sat at my desk a lot and wrote a lot of, I wrote a lot more than I did now. I also did a lot of legal research and a lot of fact gathering, especially as a junior associate. My job was basically trying to manage facts and organize the actual discovery that was coming in. And it is a lot of that area. Discovery is basically dealing with what we know, what we don't know, and finding out more information. That's the fact gathering phase. As a prosecutor, I do a lot more oral advocacy. So I'm in court a lot. I'm in court definitely every week, essentially 3 days a week. So I'm interfacing with judges a lot more. I'm interfacing with opposing counsel a lot more and engaging in negotiations on a daily basis because I have a caseload of my own that I manage of about 60 to 70 cases. So depending on what you decide to do, it's going to focus more on different aspects of what it means to practice law. And then other things you can do if you don't want to practice law. I have friends and colleagues who are in academia. I have friends and colleagues who are in the sports area. I have other friends who are in the policy area, and that's a lot of what some people do with the JDs, go into research and policy.
So I'll jump in. I'll be careful not to talk about necessarily what the practice of law is because I just graduated from law school this year. So have no years of practicing. So I'll talk more about, the different things that you can do with the law degree. And I will say that having a law degree, you can do a number of things. And I would just relate to my experience from being in law school. While I was in law school, my first year, I was able to go through the interview process with the FBI's honors program. And I thought in the beginning that, I probably needed some type of, criminal justice type of background, but having a law degree allowed me to go through that interview process. And I actually got the position, but something happened with funding. So government is always, kind of tight on funding. So that didn't work out. And that summer, I just ended up, taking an extra class because that internship fell through. But after that first year of law school, the second year, I still took a non-legal route, I guess you can say, and I worked at a financial firm, Merrill Lynch. And that was a good experience because I was able to also use my legal background in finance, because some of the issues I was working on at Merrill Lynch involved things such as helping private companies raise capital. And whenever private companies raise capital, the way they go about it is called something called a roadshow. And then also they have marketing materials, the offering documents that they have to provide to investors, so that way they know what type of security they're getting ready to purchase. And I was able to use my legal background, and also I was gaining financial experience as well with Merrill Lynch. And then as of right now, I'm working in the U.S. Congress, and although you don't necessarily need a legal degree to work in Congress, having that legal background helps me out when it comes to reviewing different proposed legislation. And then also the skills you learn in law school are very valuable, such as legal research, because as of right now, as I mentioned, I'm working on tax, trade, and energy policy. It's a big portfolio, but a lot of times I have to do a lot of research to get up to speed on what I'm getting ready to talk to some of these lobbyists about. So the things you can do with the law degree is very broad, and you don't necessarily have to just focus on being in a courtroom.
Okay, so as our panelists mentioned, there are a number of things you can do with a law degree. I'm seeing people enter in the chat some of your goals. That's awesome, y'all. Thanks so much for sharing. This leads us into the next topic of discussion, though, and that's why should you, or maybe why shouldn't you, choose law school over something else? And so I'll let Rhett and Sara take that one away.
Well, that's kind of always been my topic. Let me start off by saying, to be honest, I mean, law is a great career. It's a wonderful discipline. It's good for your brain and good for your pocketbook. It's also extremely difficult, and it's very time consuming, and it's very stressful. And especially if you do it at a high level and you're really good at it. If you want to be really good at it, and I mean, who wants to be mediocre at anything? If you're going to be really good at it, it takes a lot of time and effort. And that's really what I caution people about all the time. What I like to tell people is that, and I used to see this a lot, you'd see people going to law school and you'd say, well, why are you going to law school? So, well, my uncle used to tell me I argued a lot. So he said, well, you ought to go to law school. Or my friends say, yeah, you talk all the time. You ought to go to law school. That's a really lousy reason to go to law school. What I encourage people to do is to think about your goals. What do you want to do with your life? What do you have a passion for? What aspect of business or the economy or the society, or what do you want to do with your time and your effort for the rest of your life? Because after all, 40 years is a very long time. And if you need a law degree to do that, then you ought to go to law school. If you don't need a law degree to do that, then I think 3 years in law school is kind of a waste of time, because there's a whole lot easier and better way to do it. A law degree is interesting. Law school is not interesting. Practicing law, I agree with Brian. The years that I spent practicing law were some of the most interesting things I ever did. It was fascinating. But I'll share with you another thing you ought to think about as to why you ought perhaps not go into law, and that is that lawyers carry briefcases for the guy who makes decisions. And that's just fundamentally true. Now, there are instances, and you can always find anecdotal evidence of a lawyer who becomes the CEO of a company or runs his own company or is in charge, but that's rare. And you shouldn't go to law school with the idea that you're going to be the CEO of a company or you're going to have your own company or whatever. Mostly what lawyers do is provide legal advice to other people to help them make good decisions. And that's what you do. And if you're not interested in providing services to help other people with their legal problems, if you want to be in charge, then don't be a lawyer because you're not ever going to be in charge. At least that's always been my experience. Another thing that I always tell people to think about with law school is, and I encourage people to think about life this way, think in terms of probabilities. What is the most likely outcome? You know, people read all these law review articles in the paper about lawyers making, you know, six-figure incomes, and you make all this money and you do all this stuff and, you know, everything's great and you make a ton of money. Well, that's true for the top 10% of the class. But remember this, only really smart people go to law school. Only people who really work hard and are really focused go to law school. 100% of the people in your class in law school are going to be really smart, really focused, really hardworking. But only 10% of them will be in the top 10% of their class. And that's where the really best jobs go. That's a low probability outcome if, you know, making the big bucks is your goal. So what I would say is don't try to do that. Don't go into law thinking you're going to make a lot of money. It is a good profession and it will reward you for your time and your effort. But that's just not the reason to go into it. You ought to go to law school because it helps you fulfill a goal that you have for life, whatever you're trying to achieve. And the final thing that I will say to think about, I mean, first of all, law school is really hard. You know, it's 3 years of HELL. It's really hard. And why would you want to spend 3 years of your life going through that to end up in a career that you don't have passion for? You know, that you don't really have the fire in your belly to want to be a lawyer. It's just silly to do that, I think. And another thing that's really worth thinking about is once you get a law degree, you know, it helps you do better at anything else that you're going to do, but it may not be essential to get you down the path to get to where you want to go. It's just not. Now, the other thing about practicing law and why you ought to really think about the career of law or not, it's extremely stressful. And I mean, lots of things are stressful, but being a lawyer is much more stressful, I think, than any other profession. It's a 24/7 job. It really is. And, you know, as I said, I practiced law for 40 something years and I got to be at the top level of the career. And, you know, I was on the management committee of a major law firm and, you know, I had a pretty heady career the last 10 or 12 years that I was practicing. And I would go to these meetings with all my peers, you know, the senior partners, these various law firms. And we'd go around the table and I'd say, how many of you guys recommend to your children to go to law school? And none of them would. None of them. They all agree. And we'd talk about this and I'd say, well, why not? I said, I don't recommend to my children to go to law school. One of them did, but I discouraged him from it. And, you know, say, well, it's because of the work-life balance. The problem with work-life balance for a lawyer is that the law firm will suck the juice out of you. It'll suck the life out of you. They really will. And what they give you in exchange is money. Now, you know, how much is your life really worth? I mean, that's kind of the way to think about it. So anyway, I have a lot of opinions about this. And, you know, if you really want to be a lawyer, if you really got the fire in your belly, you really have a passion for wanting to do this, then that's great. It's a good profession and it will reward you. But don't do it if you're lackadaisical about it or if you're not certain about it. And by the way, I'd be happy to talk to anybody that wants to communicate about this. Just send me an email or call me sometime. I have a lot of opinions about these things, as you can tell. Thanks.
I think what Rhett said exactly is exactly true. See if there are other ways that you want to accomplish, that you get to do what you want to accomplish without going to law school. I mean, if you want to make an impact, there are other ways to do that than being a lawyer. You can work and get involved in a nonprofit. You can go to a grad school program that lets you get involved in policy making. If you want to, go and do a government route, there are a lot of different options that maybe won't take over your life in the way that Rhett said. Working at a big firm and being a younger associate, I will say it's a 24-hour job, even when you're on vacation. I was just speaking to one of my old associates last week. He was on vacation in Barcelona with his wife and got a call from the partner. Hey, I have a question about this. And it wasn't a, oh, so sorry for interrupting your vacation. It was a, hey, I need to know this now. And so that's always going to happen. A vacation is never 100% vacation, turn off your phone. This is just a job that takes over your whole life. Also, when you're going into law school and you're applying and taking the Lsat, I know a lot of y'all are interested in that process. If you don't do well on the Lsat and you can't, we'll kind of talk about this a little later, but can't get into a great law school and you're planning on taking out a ton of debt, it's probably not worth it. Like Rhett said, of you getting one of these super lucrative jobs coming out of law school, or even maybe down the road, that might not happen to where the average debt of a law school student is $118,000. And yes, you can pay that off. And there are government programs and all of that. But if you're going to a law school that's not as great or highly ranked, you're not going to, the paths for you to get the job that you might be looking for might not be available to you right off the bat. So, yeah.
I'll just add something real quick to Rhett's point about if you want to go to law school, you should definitely have a reason why. So the reason I went to law school is sort of a strange reason. And whenever I was a junior at Texas State, we had the Terry picnic, and this guy was giving his senior speech, and he gave this speech about what he was getting ready to do and how he was going to law school. He had big dreams. He was very ambitious, and it inspired me. And right after he gave that speech, I was like, hey, I want to go to law school. Even though at the time I had never thought about law school. So he gave that speech. I met up with him, got some LSAT material, studied for the LSAT, went to law school. Right before I went to law school, spoke with Mr. Campbell. He was telling me why I shouldn't go to law school. And like most prospective law students, you can tell them as much as you want, don't go to law school, they're still gonna go. I did that, went to law school, realized, dang, Mr. Campbell was right this whole time. I should never, did this. But I learned a lot. Law school was a good experience, but I went to law school not because I wanted to be an attorney. I went because at the time somebody gave a speech about what they were getting ready to do, and I was inspired, so that's why I went. So I went for a not good reason, but that's my part about it.
Panel, thank you so much for your insights and your honesty here. I think the message with this is something similar that we heard during our graduate school panel, and that's know your why and make sure that it's your why and not someone else's. So let's say you've gotten to the point where you've pretty solidified that this is something you know you're going to do, it's something you're passionate about. How do you compare law schools and how do you find the best fit for yourself? Is it like looking at between graduate schools? So I'll be interested to hear what the panel has to say about that once you start down that portion of your journey.
Sure. So I think there's a lot of things to consider when you're choosing a law school. And I'll just talk about a few of them. I think the location of practice of where you want to actually end up is really important when you're considering where you want to go to law school. If you are, I went to the University of Houston, for example. Obviously, a lot of the alumni of the University of Houston stay in Houston. I wanted to be in Houston, and so that was a good option for me. But I looked at other schools who, while they had a good reputation regionally, nobody really knew them outside of that region. And if I had wanted to move to Houston, they didn't have a lot of alumni connections or anyone looking for people from that school to work in Houston. And so that was something I really needed to consider. So look at where the alumni of the schools you're considering are actually working, because maybe they are in the place that you want to be. But if they're not, that's something that you're going to really need to consider, because you need to see, okay, does the school already have the connections, or am I going to need to reach out and make those connections for myself if I go to this school? Another one would be practice area. What do you see yourself doing? Do the schools that you are looking at have the programs that you're interested in, whether it be IP or business litigation, transactional? Do they have classes that will interest you after your first year of law school, or programs down the road? But I would also say take that with a grain of salt, because I went into law school thinking I was going to practice family law. And then I spoke to a few lawyers and I did an internship and I was like, you know, and had to kind of pivot. So then I really enjoy what I'm doing now, but it's not what I went to law school for. And so when you see that, make sure that there are other opportunities at that school that could potentially interest you. I would also look at the employment rates of graduates. I think that's pretty obvious, but it is important of what are the graduates doing? Do they have jobs? What's the percentage of that coming out of the first year? Where are they working? How much are they making? What does the career services program look like for your school? Are they going to help you get a job, or are you going to have to do it yourself? Because ultimately, most of the time, that's what law school is about. You get the education to be able to get the job you want. And it's super important that you have a opportunity or a program that allows you to connect with the people that you want to connect with. The Terry Connect is great for that as well, but a lot of law schools provide those resources. So are those resources available at the schools you're considering? OCI, on-campus interviews. Do schools actually go to the schools you're looking at to hire their graduates? That's another thing to consider. Scholarships was huge for me. And so I looked at all the different schools that I applied, after I took the LSAT, and compared scholarships. And I actually negotiated my scholarship with some of the schools. Some of them just want you to go there. And so they'll offer you an initial scholarship and then they might up it down the road when you haven't committed. I experienced that as well. But like the University of Houston, I said, this is where I want to be, but I need a little more. And they worked with me. And so if there's a school that you really want to go to, try to do that and negotiate for yourself. That is possible. And so I think all of those are really important considerations when looking at law schools and the law school that you choose for yourself.
I'll also jump in here. So I'm comparing a little bit to my experience going into undergrad versus law school. For undergrad, I applied to 2 schools. I knew, growing up in Texas, if you were in the top 10%, or it used to be, if you're in the top 10% of your high school class, you know that you could get in to UT. And that was my plan. So I was like, that's it. And then I had one other school that I was like, that could be cool. I'd love to go to school in Malibu. So I applied to Pepperdine. And so I didn't have much of a choice. And then I got the Terry scholarship and it was a no-brainer. Law school, on the other hand, I was accepted into this program called the Sidley Pre-Law Scholarship. And Sidley Austin is a big law firm that's based out of Chicago. And they had a program, I don't know if it exists now, but I learned this through my law school counselor in the College of Liberal Arts, that will sponsor you. They will sponsor a LSAT prep course for you. They will sponsor up to 7 applications. So I did the exact opposite. I applied everywhere that I could that I thought I might be interested in, ran the whole gambit from like Stanford down to what I thought was a safety school. And I was not sure at all what the results were going to be. And I guess I wanted to take some time here to encourage all of you guys, like, you should not doubt yourself when you're going through the application process. I wasn't so completely satisfied with like my LSAT score. I was like a few points shy of my goal. And I thought, Stanford is a reach, but it's my dream school and I have to try. And in addition to the 7 applications that the pre-law scholarship granted me, a lot of schools gave me fee waivers. So like I had no intention of applying to Columbia, but they gave me a fee waiver. So I shot them an application and I happened to get in. So definitely believe in yourself. I had a colleague at my law firm who went to Yale, which is Yale Law School is perennial, like always ranked #1. And she was telling me about how she thought no one would accept her application. No one, but she got accepted into the #1 law school in the country. So don't discount yourself. Don't think that you don't have a shot. You definitely have to shoot your shot. And maybe we'll talk more about what makes a strong application later, but don't limit your options before they even present themselves to you. When you get your options, my recommendation is if you get into the top 3, like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, you should go. I think you should absolutely go. They're expensive, but I think they're absolutely worth it for a lot of reasons that Sara already touched on. They have a great alumni network. They a lot of top jobs will come to the school while they're doing on-campus interviews. And even if they don't, those schools have so much pool that you won't have a problem practicing in the location that you want to practice. So, my law school had about 180 people per class. And we have people all over the country. We have people in Alabama, we have people in Texas, we have people in Pennsylvania. So the higher you go, the better opportunities you have. And I did graduate with a bunch of debt. I graduated with 6 figures of debt, but I still think it was worth it. And one thing to consider is even if you can't get a full ride to some of these top schools, your financial situation will be taken into consideration. I graduated with a lot of debt, but I graduated with about half as much as my partner, who would not have been granted a Terry scholarship because his family was very, very well off. So again, just don't discount yourself and think about what kind of experience you want to have in law school. I think particularly at Stanford, they have a very interdisciplinary culture. So not only can you take classes at the law school, but you can take classes at the School of Education, like I did. You can take classes at you can take computer science classes. You can take classes at the School of Graduate School of Business. You can consider things like that, like what university am I going to? What resources will I have if I go to this school? And I think those are the major things that I considered when comparing law schools. The money definitely matters, but I would say, reach for the stars. The higher, like I definitely would not have made it to where I am now if it weren't for the network that came with going to a top law school.
Let me just quickly emphasize what Rachel just said, and it's kind of made me think about it for a minute. If you have an opportunity, if you really want to go to law school, then you're going to go. And if you have the opportunity to go to one of the top schools in the United States, you ought to do that. But remember this, the bottom 10th of the class at any school is going to have a hard time finding a job. They are. Now, my rule about top 10% changes a little bit if you're talking about Yale, Harvard, Stanford, some of the top schools. There, it's more like the top half. The top half of the class in those schools are going to get really good jobs. And all the big major law firms and all the judges and all the government positions, they all interview at those major schools. But you don't want to incur an awful lot of debt that you may not be able to pay back. And you don't want to be at the bottom of the class at a really good school. You don't want to be at the bottom of the class anywhere. So go to a school that's appropriate for you and where you can do well and succeed. Success is the ultimate goal, and that's what we're aiming for, not the prestigious name of a school.
Yeah, I think visiting a law school is really important before you go if you're looking at a few, because frankly, the University of Houston Law Center looks like a dungeon. It just does. It's a hideous building. It's all concrete. There's actually 2 basements. So like it's just, there are some renovated rooms and some nice places, but you have to think, can I be here for 3 years? I'm going to basically live here for 3 years. Can I do that? And for me, the answer was yes. But for some people, they go and visit and they're like, absolutely not. We are getting a new building. But that's something that you need to think, like, do I want to live in Houston for 3 years if I want to be somewhere else, if I want to be in Dallas, or if I want to be in New York? Like I said before, are there opportunities for me if I'm going to law school in Houston to move to New York? And like what Rhett said, yes, they are going to be there, but that's if you're at the very top of the class, then you can make that jump. I do know people who did that, but those are all things that you need to consider when you're choosing a school.
So Danielle, I'm curious, how did you choose the school that you're attending?
Yeah, so I kind of was about to say what Sara said, was visiting. I mean, I went through this only like 2 years ago. So, I mean, I had no idea. I knew I wanted to be in Texas, but I had no idea what area I wanted to be in. Love Dallas, love Houston, big fan of Austin too. So I was really stuck, and mine was apply everywhere and then visit everywhere. I knew what kind of experience I wanted in law school, and I really could tell the second I visited every school I tutored in on a class. And that's how I made my decision. It's from talking to people. I went from A&M, which is ginormous, and I knew I wanted a smaller school. Visited Tech and U of H and was in a little bit bigger of classes, first year classes. And then I went to Baylor and I was in a first year class of 40 people sitting in on a class. And that's kind of how I made my decision. I also kind of looked, since I did take time off, I really looked at when I could start, and Baylor has 3 starting dates. So you can start fall, but you can also start spring and summer since we're on a quarter system. So I started in the spring of spring 2019. So, I mean, and ultimately I'll end up graduating in a little over 2.5 years, which was also nice. Was ready to, since I did take time off, to get out and start my career. Another thing I looked at was my parents are expert witnesses. So I knew from the start that I wanted to be in a courtroom, that I wanted to be up in front of people, and I would not have chosen Baylor if I did. We have a very rigorous practice court program that Mr. Carroll has been through, that if you want to do transactional, I would tell you do not go to Baylor. There's some of my friends that are wanting to be transactional, and they're like, we have to do what? We have to try a whole case like before we graduate. Like, I don't want to do that, but it's now too late for them to transfer or go somewhere else. But I think visiting schools, seeing what programs they have available, talking to, I mean, the career people will talk to you even if you're, I guess, what is the word I'm looking for? If you're looking to go to law school, they'll talk to you before then. They'll tell you what they do, what's available. So it's not just the admission people you can talk to. Oh, hold on. I see a question real quick in the chat that I can kind of talk about. Somebody asked, do you recommend going straight through or taking a break before continuing with law school? Kind of personal preference. I worked really hard at A&M, and I knew I wasn't ready to work really, really hard for another 3 years. So I took a little bit of time off, and I think it's the best thing I have done. I went into law school with a clear head, not burnout, ready to work and focused. And I don't think I would have done that if I didn't take a break, but a lot of my classmates went all the way through and loved it. So other than that, I don't have anything else on how to choose a law school except for visit, talk to people. Everybody will be willing to talk to you, students, alumni, everybody.
So there were two
Great.
quick things that I forgot to mention to consider when going to law school. Is one, this also kind of ties in with the ranking, but some schools, for instance, Stanford doesn't rank, and they don't have real grades. They do have grades. They say they don't have grades, but they do. It's instead of A, B, C, D, it's honors, pass, basically. And the top 30% of a class will get an H or so. It can range between 30 and 40%. I think Yale has a similar system where they don't even have a percentage. They don't dole out percentages. They just give H's to people they want to give H's to and P's to people they want to give P's to. And the second thing that you want to look into, especially if you're considering going into public interest or the public sector, is whether this law school has a loan repayment assistant program or something. They all have different acronyms, but at my school, they called it LRAP, where the law school will pay your loans down if you are in the public sector. So that's definitely something to consider if you don't think you want to work for like a commercial law firm.
Thank you all so much for your insight here, panelists. One thing that I want to plug for everybody, and it's something that all the panelists have mentioned so far, is talking to people, doing your research, taking advantage of networks. That's exactly why we're doing this. We're only doing this for an hour, but you have Terry Connect at your disposal. If you're interested in a school, look up a Terry scholar who has attended or is attending that school and ask them questions. Ask them about their application process. Ask them about some of the things they discovered or things that they wish they had known. It's a huge benefit to be a part of this network for this very reason. And that leads me into sort of the next question that I have for our panelists, which is, can you all share some tips for getting the most out of law school and law networks in particular? And then I want to make sure we have a couple of minutes to touch on applications and just tips y'all might have for being competitive on the application process. So if you have a question not related to networks or applications, please feel free to throw that in the chat just in case we need to follow up with you after the session. But I'll let Brian, Danielle, and Cody talk about networks for the next few minutes. And then we'll save a couple minutes at the end so that y'all can circle back around to being competitive in the application process.
Well, the networking aspect of law school is probably one of the most important things because something everyone's talked about, 90% of people in law school will not be in the top 10%. You're gonna have to find something that sets you apart. And I wasn't in the top 10% of my law school class, but I had worked, I had a hook, I was an engineer, which less than 2% of all people who go to law school are engineers. It made me unique, and I went into a practice area that I had found through networking that was construction law. And so I was dealing with the subject matter that I had been trained on and worked beforehand. It's super important if you're an accounting major, do you do tax law? Do you have an undergrad that sets you up to succeed because of that? It had allowed me when I was a baby lawyer to do the second thing as a law student that's going to get you a big job that's going to pay well, is the ability to generate business. If you can be a medium in the class law student, if you can generate $1 million or $2 million a year in revenue for a firm, people will call and knock on your door. I can promise you that. And I've experienced that firsthand. I've had job offers from most of the major national construction law firms to move and join because of the contacts I made in that process. The other reason for the networking is trying to figure out, are you happy with where you are? The odds say, just as Mr. Campbell changed firms, I changed firms early in my career. I didn't like what the direction the firm was going, and the contacts you make will allow you to make those jumps and moves, and at times those can be very profitable moves. When you don't start off in that big top 10%, you may get offered the job if you wanted it a big firm. The last thing I will say is do not confuse success in your practice with being at a big firm. A big firm is great, but I would take my job in a boutique firm any day. I have practiced against the largest firms in the country. I have worked on fascinating projects that literally span from Africa to Asia, and you can do amazing things if you find the contacts to find the firms that do that are often not large firms. So again, I cannot stress enough, make friends with your peers, your law professors, and use Terry Connect to find those of us who are in practice, because I would look at a Terry scholar is the first person I would look to hire, and I do the hiring for my firm. And so that's important to me as you get out and figure out where you want to be and what you want to do.
And I think that one of the things Mr. Carroll said was, I keep wanting to call you professor, I'm sorry, was that to connect with your peers in your law school. I think that from day one, those are the people that you're going to remember. And when you get out of law school, you're going to call them if you need something. So it's a professional school, treat it professionally and start networking and get to know and make good relationships with those people in your class. Because you don't want to be the person in your class that no one would ever call or recommend or refer business to. I think for getting the most out of law school is take every opportunity that presents itself. If you don't know what you want to do, take classes that you wouldn't ever even think about. I would have never thought about going into construction law, and I took Mr. Carroll's class last winter, and it's probably what I will be getting a job with after I graduate. In talking to professors, I know it's scary at times, but those people are going to also give you opportunities. They're not that scary of people once you get to know them. You just have to make the effort to get to know them and work on those relationships throughout your whole time in law school. Another thing, take advantage of the networking that your school puts on. Those opportunities, alumni do want to meet students and they want to hire students. So just take advantage of that. And then right now, I know it's weird virtually to network, but don't be afraid to send an email to someone in a practice area that you're interested in. Just asking if you can discuss it more. Most of the time, people are actually very open to that. I've had a few Zoom calls with people just asking about their firm or their practice or how to get into a certain area. And it's really, really beneficial. Other than that.
And I'll quickly add that networking doesn't necessarily mean going to a networking cocktail hour or something very specific like that. I like to think of networking, or I don't like to think of networking. Instead, I happen to be a very social person. I think the best way to network is to actually interact with your classmates and pursue interests that you have. If it's in a pro bono organization at your school, a student organization, a clinic, just make sure you're not holding up, as some people are tempted to do. You're not holding up and just reading and doing the grind. Like, actually interact with your classmates. They all have very interesting backgrounds, and they're going to go a lot of different places. So if you just actually interact, make those connections and maintain those connections, essentially stay friends with your friends, and you'll have a great network.
Yeah, and I'll try to add a quick perspective. I know we're running out of time a bit, but networking is extremely important. And I would say that if you are an introvert, when you go to law school, you have to change that. There were two things I had as my top priorities in law school. One was, finish law school. The second was to network. And most of the opportunities that I've received have come from networking. And by networking, you meet someone who may introduce you to someone else. So it has a collateral effect. And I would say this for the folks who are on the Zoom call, I think this will benefit you more based upon where you're at right now. When I was in law school, I volunteered for a lot of law school events, and you'll be amazed at how many events law schools host, because they also do networking, but they network with the attorneys who graduated from the law school because they're trying to get them to donate back to the school. So if you volunteer to help the law school out at some of these events, you basically go to these events for free and you get to meet a lot of, I would say, important people. And whenever I would go to these events, I was supposed to be volunteering, but I was around networking and, leaving my post to go meet an attorney who I've heard about. And that's a great way to, make connections. So
just kind of going off of what they said, law school is the time to set yourself up for success down the road. And so making those connections with your peers, with the alumni of the school and going to those events, but also what you get involved in law school is really important. It's not just the classes that you take, because everyone is going to come out of law school with the same degree from your school. And so it's those things that you put on a resume that make you stand out, whether that be a law review or mock trial, moot court, any sort of clinics. And those things also let you see what you like and don't like. Like I said, I volunteer. I thought I wanted to do family law. So I volunteered for the Center for Child Law and I was a fellow for the Center for Child Law and Policy at the University of Houston. And I was like, wow, this blows. And so I pivoted, but I had that opportunity to do those things. And like I said at the beginning, I recently lateraled. I'm just now going into my third year of practice. And so firms really consider what is on your resume from law school when you make those switches early. And so you need to set yourself up for success. And like, I was on law review. I did different things in law school that made firms, even though my grades, I wasn't in the top 10%, it made me a lucrative candidate.
Panel, I want to thank y'all so much for your input today. We have about 5 minutes left. And I feel like this is a topic we could continue to go on, into the afternoon. But one question that was submitted multiple times during registration that I wanted to make sure we got different perspectives on has to do with the actual application process itself. So panel, do you have any advice about what would make somebody a very competitive applicant, or what, in your opinion, is something that law schools value most on an application?
So
I'll speak up from Baylor. Oh, go ahead, Rachel.
No, it's fine.
I'll say, at least in Baylor's context, is that your letters of references are massively important. If you have a letter of reference for someone who's been successful at that university, who is a connection, I strongly encourage you at least have one of those in your reference letter pool. Because I do know at Baylor that does make a huge difference, and that's part of how I got into Baylor.
So everyone knows that the most important things for your application are your GPA and the Lsat score. That's absolutely true. I think the thing that starts to set you apart is going to be your resume, like your experience. What have you done to show that you are a well-rounded person? Because they want not only people who are smart, but law schools want people who are passionate, who are leaders. And I think the more that you can, the key to a strong application is seizing on every opportunity to show the reader a different aspect of who you are. When I applied, everybody has to write a personal statement. It's only like 2 pages, but it's very important 2 pages, right? So I like wrote and rewrote my personal statement, had tons of people read it. It's very important. I also submitted a diversity statement. I also submitted a hardship statement. And I made sure that each and every one of those essays highlighted a different aspect of my personality and why I thought I was a worthy candidate for the school. So definitely make sure you seize on those opportunities. And I would also encourage anyone who's in undergrad to pursue your interests, because that will naturally get you into organizations that you care about, which will naturally get you into like leadership opportunities and internship opportunities. So make sure you're doing all that you can to pursue what really makes you tick, and then that will come out in your application.
My only advice is to apply early, and if they offer an interview, do the interview. That's how I ended up at Baylor, and I'm very happy that I did.
I think it's important if your school has a pre-law society to get involved in that. I was involved in the one at Tech, and they had admissions officers from a lot of different schools come to Tech, and that's your time to talk with them one-on-one about their school. And I know I made some connections with admissions officers during that process to where when my application landed on their desk, they knew who I was. And that helped me with scholarship opportunities. It helped me in a number of ways. And so get involved in those and don't be afraid to ask questions when you meet with them, and tell them, I'm interested in your school. What will set me apart? Because they'll let you know.
I'll add one quick perspective. I think Sara and Mr. Campbell made two great points earlier throughout the discussion when they said that where you want to practice law is where you should more than likely try to go to school. I think that, and also who gives you the most money is more important as well. But that's my perspective. So
I'm just gonna plug Stanford. If you get into Stanford, go.
Yeah, I think if you're at the top, like what Rachel did, you can go anywhere. And so when you're looking at rankings, sorry, my light went off. When you're looking at rankings, that's a big consideration. Is if you're going to Stanford, you can end up where you want to end up. But if you're going to a smaller regional school that is lower in the rankings or might not be ranked, it's going to be a lot harder if you want to end up somewhere else.
Well, panel, I thank y'all so much for your perspective today. Terry's, as you can see, there are a lot of different directions that you can take this conversation. And obviously we weren't able to cover everything, but an overall theme for this and any of our virtual events is please, please, please tap into this network. There are so many talented individuals, intelligent individuals, people that have a wide breadth of experience, and they are willing to give back by speaking to you. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to reach out to somebody who's already a lawyer. Maybe you can talk to someone who's going through the process that you're going through and see if they have any tips, if they're right in the middle of things too. This is where Terry Connect can be a large tool. Make sure that you've updated your profile with what your goals are, with keywords that might help you connect with other people, but also might help other people connect with you. See if there are other people who have already interviewed at the school that you're interested in or have applied at the school that you're interested in. The lawyers that we have right now on this panel are a very small sampling of what is available through the Terry network of people who honestly do want to give you their perspective and are happy to hear from you. If you're not sure of how to reach out to someone, particularly if they're an alum, please reach out to me. That's one of the things I love doing, is helping people make connections, myself and the other staff and directors like Mr. Campbell and Yvonne Moody, who know some of these alumni, are happy to help sort of bridge those gaps for you. It's an advantage. It's part of being a Terry Scholar that you can really make work for you. The tool of Terry Connect is only as effective as the work that you put into it. So my recommendation, not just for those of you on the line, but also even for our panelists, is make sure that you have as complete a profile as possible so that people can find you either with their questions or, again, to help you connect with other people. I know that we got a lot of questions about the Lsat, and that's not really something we covered today. Fear not, we are planning a virtual event specifically about LSAT, MCAT, and other exams so that we can get Terrys who have studied for them very recently and have tips and advice and things they want to share about that. So even though we didn't cover LSAT today, we do intend to help y'all find resources for it. It just won't be until the spring. With that, I just want to thank our panelists one more time. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. When I share today's recording, the link will also have the chat. So you'll be able to go back through and read the chat as you're watching the recording. You'll be able to download and save the recording. And we'll also have this available on our YouTube channel and on Terry Connect. So again, this doesn't have to be the last time you're able to utilize the Terry Network as a tool. I hope this is the jumping off point and that you'll reach out to our panelists, you'll reach out to each other, and to other Terrys in the network. So once again, everyone, thank y'all so much for joining us. Panel, I hope that you all have a great rest of your week, and that everyone has a positive end to your 2020, or as positive as possible. So thank y'all so much. I'll stop our recording now.